What's up, Shred Sexies? Welcome back. Death to the Fingers. I was all ready to rock and roll this morning, and I realized at the last minute that I had a doctor's appointment, so I had to do some adulting, and by the time I got home, because it was thoroughly miserable out there, had a bit of a snowstorm and all this good stuff, and, going to the doctor's, yeah, that's a good time. So we're just going to do the sit-down video because I am way too lazy right now to strap on the axe and basically go through all that nonsense. No! Sunday. So, but we will talk about these 8 important, what I believe to be the most important systems that you should know, learn, and basically have under your fingers if you want to construe yourself to be a super sick guitar player. So we're going to go through them one right after another. Good times. Write them down and then learn them. You'll thank me later. Let's do this. All right, number 1 on the list here, and they're not really in any particular order except for this one here being, honestly, in my opinion, the most important, the one that everyone has to know. Doesn't matter what style of music you're playing, unless you're doing classical music, this scale is a must. And of course, it's the pentatonic scale. And the reason I say that is because it is honestly the most straightforward and obvious scale system that breaks down the fretboard in some sort of meaningful way and allows guitarists to basically start tearing it up with a relative level of confidence and ease because it's pretty straightforward. But once you get into it, you realize that there's like this whole new level with respect to the application of the scale. So starting off in the kiddie pool, just learning the shapes and stuff and playing some blues licks, that's one thing. But then when you start to factor in other capabilities that this scale can exhibit, well, then all of a sudden you're getting into like some really advanced jazz territory and whatnot. So don't, like it can make chords and triads or even more exotic sounds. It does scales, chromaticism. You have obviously the bluesiness of the flat third, and it pairs up amazingly, with the harmonic and melodic minor. So, and of course the major scales and all the rest of that. So that's why it's number 1 on the list and why you should learn it. This has got to be, in my opinion, the foundational knowledge with respect to scales, because it's only 5 notes, 5 shapes. They're pretty straightforward, 2 notes on every string. It helps you break down the fretboard in relation to the diatonic scale. And of course, the sky's the limit when it comes to basically application. It's just limited by your imagination, honestly, because I've seen every possible application of this scale, from the most obvious ones. You're just like, yeah, okay, I've heard that one, to Chuck Berry, to some absolutely ridiculous fusion shred stuff. I'm just like, that was all basically the pentatonic scale. But the way that the person played it was so awesome. And it wasn't just the technique. I mean, the selection of notes. I was just shocked. That's what I was like, just when you think you know something, or you're like, I think I'm getting good, you see something like that and you're like, okay, there's a bit of a ways to go. So don't let this little 5-note scale trick you into believing that it doesn't have the legs to go all the way. This thing can go around the globe a couple times and then some, and it is an absolute must piece of information for you to have under the fingers. The end. Next. All right, next on the hit list here is basically 3 notes per string. And I'm not talking about the major scale and the modes and all the rest of that. I'm talking about the actual system itself. The idea of just creating a symmetrical sort of breakdown of notes on the fretboard based around a diatonic scale, based around the melodic minor, the harmonic minor, whatever it is. But where you're using 3 notes on every single string. that is the most obvious and logical way to sort of like build up your scale knowledge. And then later on, when you get more comfortable with those sounds and you start to understand these shapes a little bit more intimately, then you can start moving up and down vertically. Like John McLaughlin does this a lot, and a whole bunch of other guys. I watched a guy on the internet, Pepper Brown. You could probably still see his channel on the YouTubes, right? So go check that out. But he did the same thing based off every single scale degree, would build a whole new scale. So, you know, that's kind of taking it to an extreme, but definitely the 3 notes per string stuff, because it applies to, like I said, the major modes, the harmonic minor, the melodic minor. You have even more sort of like compound scales that are based around diatonic scales, but are sneaking in an extra note here and there. So you could almost see it that way too, but just the mindset, because eventually these vertical shapes, you're just basically seeing 2 of these 3 notes per string systems overlapping and just playing half of one and a third of the other, or whatever it is, right? So there it is. Or I should have said 2/3 of one and a third of the other, but it's 6.5 dozen in the other. And honestly, the idea that the 3 notes per string lets you basically string huge cascading runs together, both vertically, right, just up and down on one string, and then all of a sudden you can start traversing the strings like that and just keep going. It's conducive for economy picking and hammer-ons and pull-offs, tapping, and alternate picking. So that's why it is the most important sort of like arrangement system, if you will, for notes with respect to diatonic scales. So 3 notes per string, tres importante. Get in there. And here's the other thing, I guess the bonus is that it is so popular in a lot of ways that there's a lot of free material on the internet where you can just download these scale systems and just start learning them for yourself. Obviously start off with the major scale and the major modes, and then move into the harmonic minor, then the melodic minor, and then basically start to factor in other minor type scales, the Hungarian minor, the Polish minor, who knows, right? Just find some weird scale and throw that in there and be like, what's this? The gypsy minor. I think you'll be pretty impressed with the kind of damage you can do with some pretty basic stuff. And again, the 3 notes per string stuff. And then, of course, you already know the pentatonics basically already covers essentially 70 or 80% of the fretboard. Done. Let's move on to the next section. All right, next here is basically the concept of a diatonic scale. You have a distance between the first note and the second note, and then there's a distance between the first note and the third note, and then there's another distance potentially between the second note and the third note. You know what I'm saying? Like there's this little intricate dance of movement of the notes relative either to the first note or just going up sequentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And sometimes the scale, you know, diatonic implies it has 7 notes, but you could look at some of the more exotic ones too, like the bebop scale and whatnot, just adapt it down to this idea. But the principle here is that you understand that there's this intricate sort of slide rule, musically speaking, that's based around these distances between the notes and the configurations that they actually produce with respect to chords and scales. And of course, with respect to chords, arpeggios. So that right there is, as far as the theory part of your music education is concerned, that's where it should be all concentrated. Is basically if I were to say, oh, go to the 3rd degree of the the natural minor scale, you'd be like, that's technically the 1st degree of a major scale. So you're talking about its relative major. Right. And you'd know that. You'd be like, oh, it's a major chord or a major 7 or maybe some other more exotic chords or a substitution, you know. So that's why that becomes important is this innate knowledge upstairs here basically translating so that you can quickly move around the fretboard using the principles of a diatonic scale and know where the hell you are. So you can be like, oh, I think I want to do this next because I happen to be at the 5th degree or whatever it is, right? Believe you me, for years and years and years, I'm like, you can just wing it, and you can. You totally can. But once you start investing a little bit of mind share into how you play and stuff and what you're playing, you get a lot more control and your solos actually sound better. So it's a bit of a bitter pill. And there should be like a creative process where you just basically start by wailing away and stuff, and then you whittle it down to stuff that's a little bit more controlled and repeatable, if you will, right? So that you can get it to sound really, really great. But you know what I mean? It all comes down to this idea that you understand how diatonic scales work. Otherwise, your solo is just going to be either very, very, very cookie cutter, right? Done by hundreds of other people, or conversely, you have a good understanding and your solos are really interesting and they get up to the level of like Matteo and Guthrie and all these absolutely fantastic guitar players. It's not just their technique. It's their ability to string the notes together, and their ability to string those note sequences together is based around their understanding of the diatonic scale and other theory principles, of course. They're operating on a whole new level, but still all the same, that one right there is huge. So get on it. Next. All right, you know what? You love it. It's essentially the cage system. I'm lazy when it comes to chords. I don't really want to spend a huge amount of time figuring out every single chord. I'm never going to be Joe Pass or Barney Kessel or these other great sort of chordists going with it. But you know, obviously learning chords and having a good grasp of them is very important in the music realm. So you need a system, and since I'm lazy, I just want one system, not multiple systems. I base my chord runs off the diatonic system once I start moving around in a scale. But when I want to sort of play different types of chords or use substitutions and more sort of chord-based hacks, I'm using the cage system. And so that's why that becomes incredibly important. It standardizes stuff. It actually provides an infinite tool, if you will, for arranging various types of arpeggios and whatnot, especially just across the fretboard by connecting together in little sort of manageable sized chunks, either 2 strings or 3 strings or whatever it is. But in my opinion, of all the systems that are out there, and there are quite a few, it's the one that just gets the most bang for your buck right away. And then if you want to take it to the next level, you have a really good foundation of information and knowledge now and experience to leap off to like the more advanced systems. But if you're like, yeah, you know, I don't care, which is fine. You just want to be able to play a couple different variations of the chord so it sounds more interesting at the jams. Well, there it is. Caged is your friend. It basically provides 5 different versions of the same chord and, of course, much more. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, 5. And, of course, again, provides a compass for you to be like, well, you know, I could see that as an E type, but then I want to do a tritone substitution, or I want to do a backdoor dominant. And now all of a sudden you can use that target note to do something else that's even more extreme than what you were going to do before. You see what I mean? It takes it up an extra level, if you will, with respect to the musicality. So, cage system, get playing those big fat chords now. All right, next up here essentially is sweeping as a system. It's sort of like 3 notes per string, but it's the concept of sweeping. Most people probably figured out by now that Frank Gambale was a big sort of influence on my playing, in the sense that I just love how economical he makes it, and it makes a lot of sense. So when you're practicing things from a technical perspective, if you can kind of align it up on the basic principles of getting a sweep in, where you can align the notes where you can do 2 strings, 3 or more, with all the same movement, either downstrokes or upstrokes, obviously that's going to be easier for you because it's just one less thing to think about. Right now, you're just down, 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 whatever it is, right? It's this other part that's got to get the job done now. But that all kind of falls under the umbrella of the sweeping sort of mentality, right? It's just a very efficient and obviously very cool sounding technique. But it's also a system. Obviously, you can start to use it to move around the fretboard in like basically infinite number of ways. But the two most important ones, obviously, are the triads, right? Both the diatonic series, where you're just going up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the inversions, where you take a major, a minor, diminished, an augmented triad, and basically create all the inversions that are superimposed, if you will, over top of each of those diatonic notes of the scale, right? Plus a few extra ones like the sharp 5 from diminished and from, of course, the augmented series. But the thing here is that if you have a good understanding of those two systems, you can be incredibly dangerous. And of course, other systems quickly fall in line, like the Gambalis, like the Barnsbys, where you're just essentially doing big sort of strings sort of cascading through the fretboard in the various positions to sort of connect them all together to create a much more expansive sort of arpeggio, which can be a very useful tool, of course, just using the arpeggio in and of itself to ascend to a new position on the neck, so you can do some soloing up there if you were playing previously down, you know, in the lower regions and vice versa kind of deal. So those are just combinations, if you will, of the triad arpeggios and the dominant 7 versions. And of course, you could say the other ones too, with respect to just 2 strings, is the exact same situation too. So those are also sort of subsumed into those systems, if you will. So that's why you should learn those ones above all else. After that, you can start getting into the more exotic flavors, you know, the arpeggios from the melodic minor system, the major 7 raised 11, obviously is going to be one. Minor 6, major 6, those are going to be big ones. The various sort of forms of diminished, more exotic forms of the dominant 7 with alterations like a flat 9 or a flat 13 or whatever it is. So those things are even sort of more expressive majors, like a major 9 or a major 13 can be pretty cool. So you're starting to see, but again, they're going to be based around those original shapes. You're just going to be adding in this new note. Instead of playing this previous one, you're going to do now the 13 instead of the 7. Oh my God, shocker. So, but you know what I mean? It's still based on this ascending of the original shape. You're just going to substitute one note for another. And so there it is. That's essentially why the sweeping principle is important, not only from a technique perspective, but also for getting around the fretboard, but also, again, as a teaching principle, because now it forces you to be more efficient and look for those technical efficiencies, if you will, so you can tighten up the mechanics of your playing, but also at the same time have this tool to sort of like ascend and descend, or use sequences in place, if you will, like we've been doing with groups of 4, to now use these arpeggios as a tool to sort of enhance your solos. It's a new element. It's like, oh, you know, I don't want to have a hamburger today. I feel like having some baby back ribs or something smoked. And so there, now that's the equivalent of this arpeggio now, right? Whatever it is. So, you know, instead of doing the pentatonic scale, you're going to play this arpeggio. And there it is. Dunsky plus you'll see its application, of course, too, when you get into the pentatonic. We did the one on string skipping where I was talking about these pentatonic arpeggios. They're more fancy ones, but at the end of the day, if you understand it's just an arpeggio, you can use that to then connect it to a dominant 7 or a triad or a more sort of exotic one, and create a really, really interesting line, and then you can just piggyback them together. So again, you're starting to see all the pieces fall into place. It's the idea of using arpeggios to create a sequence diatonically now, rather than just, oh, it's this technique to go up, down, 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 down. I'm sort of advancing the idea of this tool to be used musically to the next level, so that I can then actually practice, if you will, in a real world context, implementing it, which of course is easier said than done. We all love arpeggios, so get them into you. Next. All right, this next system here, I guess you could say it kind of falls under like a hybridization of the sweep idea, but it falls under its own category, in my opinion. It's called 3-in-1. Basically, there's a whole bunch of different applications, and I'll let you figure them out for yourself. I'm not even going to go into a big, long, sort of like, whatever explanation of this thing or how awesome it is. It is awesome, believe you me, especially with pentatonic scales, with the major scales, 3 notes per string. With respect to certain arpeggios, this is an absolutely killer technique. But of course, the most important thing to take away here is just the fact that you're always trying to, again, accomplish this goal of playing 3 notes, sort of either on one string or playing the 3 notes across 3 strings, so you get the sweep. So it's either across the one string like this, or you're playing as a sweep going up like this, right? And then again, another 3 on the next string, and that lets you do another sweep, and then another 3, and then more sweeps. So you kind of get the idea there. And it's an incredibly useful technique. You see Rick Graham use this stuff all the time, and he's an absolute savage beast. So enough said. 3-in-1. Get some of that into you. All right, next on the list essentially is hybrid. And it is a system, obviously, because you can do like the Tom Quayle stuff, which is like essentially either pick or alternate pick a little bit and then pluck the next string using the hybrid technique. And obviously you've seen Tom do it, so I think that pretty much wraps up the argument right there. So again, very, very, very powerful technique. You can get into the chicken picking stuff. You have classical applications. There's other country applications that aren't just chicken picking with open string sort of scale runs. Johnny Hillen's an amazing example of that. So, like the truth is like you have to incorporate all of these techniques into your playing anyways to keep your practice sessions fresh. So one day when you're just like, I'm not doing very good right now, you're not doing it very well. But if you just practice it even moderately regularly, I know that I said that word essentially twice, but you know what I mean? Even if you just, it's once in a while, you're throwing it into the mix, you're going to get better over a span of a year or 2 or 5. And then after 5 years, the thing you'll be like, remember when I didn't used to do this? Because it'll be one of your favorite things to do, because it's a really useful tool. And again, you can start taking it to an extreme. I've seen Rick, basically, he does a lot of the 2-finger stuff, right? So hybrid. And of course, you can take it again to the extreme if you've seen guys like Marshall Harrison, who's the essentially the innovator of this Swybrid stuff, where he's doing some alternate picking and then doing the hybrid technique with a sweep sort of idea. Wow. It is absolutely shredalicious. It's just like, oh my God. That was insanely fast. But I'm not going to lie, it's hard. It's definitely hard. And when you watch him do it, it's just so easy. It's effortless. But like I said, once you get onto it, he ran into a technical problem, and he's like, my brain doesn't like this. And so he just invented this technique, if you will, Swybrid, to overcome it. And it became integral to his playing. And now, trust me, his runs are absolutely ridiculous. Also a master of 3-in-1 and sweeps and stuff like that. To watch him play is Just wow. Holy smokes, man. Like total shred master. Ridiculous. Okay, so the hybrid stuff definitely, and if you want to take it to the extreme, kick it up there to Swybrid, Marshall Harrison. Mad lad. Let's get on to the next one. All right, here we are at the end. I think this one is way overlooked, which is just fingerstyle. I was just talking about the Marshall Harrison stuff, and then of course Rick Graham, but Andre Nieri, if you've never seen him either, he does also the sort of hybrid with 2 fingers, but he also can get into the 3-finger stuff, which is more the finger style, obviously from a classical perspective, and just absolutely obliterate the fretboard in ways that just cannot be done with a pick. And of course, you get the same sort of effect with Matteo. He does the same thing where it's just ridiculous shreddiness with the fingers. And of course, there's the whole pantheon, if you will, of the classical guys, which is that goes without saying. Those dudes are just ridiculous. I know, like you're just like, what? You watch them play, you're just like, holy wow, oh my god. I didn't even think that was humanly possible. There have been times when I was actually learning like a fairly high level classical piece, but nothing like to seriously write home to mom about, like say Leyenda or something, you know, Asturias. No way, not like that where you have like the tremolando, but like a Bach lute suite or something like that. And these people just, you're like, that's not humanly possible. You look at the tabs of the music or whatever, you're like, no, no. That's a mistake, or it's just, yeah, no, it's not real. Birds aren't real. It is absolutely real. And you see these people do it, and then you feel bad for 2 seconds. You're like, I must be able to play this passage. And there it is. Your guitar obsession is reignited. But the fingerstyle stuff is incredibly important. You see guys like Tommy Emmanuel, a master as well, on the steel string side of it, with more of like blues, jazz, sort of bluegrass sensibilities. Just, I don't even know, man. He's just an absolute chemist of the guitar. It's just he's the Jeff Beck of the steel string world, man. He's just the pinnacle. He's amazing. He's amazing. But fingerstyle, right? So even if you're just using the pick here and stuff like that, and that would be getting into fingerstyle, but I mean actually just taking it right off, like no pick, just using your thumb and your first, second, and third finger, and basically running through things. If you want to just get started on it, I would start with stuff like Giuliani's 120 right hand exercises, which is just playing through some chords, doing different patterns. I think it's like C major to G7 to something else, back to C major or whatever it is, right? So it's pretty straightforward stuff, and you can get ones where they're all tabbed out, so it's no big deal. But incredibly useful, and I think, again, another aspect of most guitar players' practice regime where they just skip right over it. What I like to do is just get a really cheap sort of classical guitar, $200, and just leave it somewhere close by when you're watching TV and stuff like that, because you can just pluck the strings nice and quietly, and it'll give you a lot more hand dexterity and, of course, finger strength and whatnot. And then just sit there and run through some of the exercises. Or if you're a person that has cable TV or whatever, these packages where you're forced to sit through commercials, there's a minute or two's worth of opportunity for you just to run through, a hardcore, brutal session of these fingerstyle sort of exercises, and there it is, done. And then just go back to watching your show, and the next time you have to be subjected to the torture, you can just pick up the axe again and just hammer away. So don't skip over the fingerstyle stuff. Honestly, it's one of the secret weapons of the uber guitar player, and your ability to sort of move fluently, if you will, between sort of like picking with the plectrum and all the rest of that stuff, to just ditching it all together and getting right into the fingerstyle. Eddie is a a classic example of that. You'd see him flick the pick and he'd go into tapping runs, and then he'd play a whole bunch of chords and stuff like that, like a veritable master of just switching between them, and then of course just grab another pick and then just go on a tear again. So that's basically what you're looking for, right? Is this idea that you could just turf the pick out into the crowd and just start latching onto some chords, right, from the Cage system or whatever else, the Diatonic system, and basically start to enhance your playing and whatnot. And that's really what we're talking about here, is just having this new element, especially if you're talking about playing more subdued music, right? And plus, of course, just getting into things like exotic drop chords and stuff like that. You basically need to use your thumb and these fingers, and sometimes even your pinky to a certain degree, to really hit all of the notes. And of course, just doing that sort of flamenco roll, if you will, takes years. So get on it. There it is. There's my list of essential systems that you should know and learn on the guitar. So write them down and then just start banging them off. Initially, just start by learning them. Of course, certain systems like the Diatonic Scales, that's you're not going to learn all the scales. You can forget about it, but learn the ones that you can. And same thing with chords and stuff. And instead, really cement your knowledge with respect to these systems. The Cage system, look for videos, other videos that basically talk about little hacks and guitar sort of shortcuts, if you will, that use the Cage system. And you'd be surprised at how much information you can build up just based around this one particular system. And you're going to get a lot of really good videos from a lot of top end guys from Nashville and other places like that, because these systems are basically ubiquitous there, because these people all have to write music together. So it's a lot easier when you're basically all drawing from the same information, right? And that's why they like to have these systems, if you will. So you have chord progressions, and they use caged chords, and they use the various inversions, blah, blah, blah. But there it is, the idea that you're going to be well-rounded missing one of these bad boys is just not true. And you do need them all. And if you do get them all, whatever, you become the Pokemon master. Which just goes to show you, I've never played Pokemon before in my entire life. Remember when Pokemon Go was a thing? Right. Let that percolate upstairs till I see you on Sunday. See you in the next one.